Rain outlines, witness the power. Punishment! Judgment!
Now, I had... Oh... Now...
Hey everyone, Jinx here and I'm a Genshin Impact math guy now. So in our previous video we covered the basics on Childe's mechanics as well as the artifacts and weapons to run on him and discussed his constellations and pros and cons. Link in the top right and the description if you have not seen that part 1 yet. Now that we've covered these basic mechanics on Childe, let's talk about what I consider the most important aspect of Childe, which is his team comps. But before we dive into that, because this is going to be quite a bit to talk about, I do want to just quickly mention that Tuna does stream live on Twitch almost every single day. I do hang out with them in voice chat several days out of the week, so be sure to come check it out if you want to come interact with us. Alright, let's talk about Childe's team comps and what makes them so strong. As previously mentioned, Childe is at his strongest as an enabling carry. He won't ever have the personal DPS of a Ganyu or a Vape Hutao or Delug or a Xiao, anything like that. However, his unparalleled Hydro application is amazing for setting up his teammates. Hydro is primarily an enabling element that enables reactions like Vaporize, Freeze, and ElectroCharge. Combine that with his very fast attack speed that synergizes well with on-hit supports like Xingqiu, Beidou, or C6 Fischl, and you have the premier enabler carry. Being an enabler carry does mean the damage potential for Childe's teams becomes very high due to Childe scaling his support's damage while also dealing good damage himself. This means that his team comps get significantly stronger the more constellations his supports have, which is very primo efficient because his best supports are 4-star units. However, this is also what makes his teams very resin expensive because you need to invest resin in both Childe and his main support he's enabling. If you want Childe's teams to be doing what they want to do, you can't really skimp out. So overall, there are 4 main Childe team styles. There's a reverse Vaporize team, there's ElectroCharge teams, pure Hydro teams, and Freeze teams. There's also double carry teams, but I'll be honest, I don't think double carry teams are very good for Childe, and they're kind of the thing that whales use because they can. It's the kind of thing that works when you have ridiculously heavily invested full teams, but is not any better than running one of Childe's primary team types. I will get more into it at the end of the video, but to be honest, I just don't really think double carry teams with Childe and another carry are that good. Now, out of these 4 main Childe team styles, the first 2 reverse Vape and ElectroCharge teams are by far the strongest teams. And on top of that, they are based around 2 supports that Childe is fantastic at enabling, Xiangling and Fischl. And yes, this is great because they are both free units that you already have and are likely units you already have quite a few constellations on. Alright, let's talk about my personal favorite team first, the Xiangling Childe reverse Vaporize team. Now, just like with the previous video, this video is going to be using a lot of information from the Childe mains Discord server. Link in the description to their server if you want to come hang out, ask any questions, or meet other people who love playing Childe. One of the nice resources they have over there is this handy chart on Childe's team compositions. We'll be referring to this chart a few times in the video and it does a great job explaining the differences between them. So according to this chart, this team comp does have a very high damage potential and it certainly does. Xiangling's ult deals an incredibly high amount of AoE damage, so high in fact that a Xiangling with a few constellations is basically just better than a Deluxe at C0. My C6 Xiangling with the exact same artifacts and teams as a C0 Deluxe in a Vape team just clears about 20% faster and she's 1 ascension lower than him. Now, the thing that makes this team so potent is Childe is able to enable every single hit of Xiangling's ultimate to be reverse vaporized for 50% more damage plus whatever bonus damage she gets from an elemental mastery. This is incredibly powerful and the DPS from overlapping Xiangling's Vape ultimate with Childe's melee damage is one of the most potent AoE DPS windows in the entire game. In fact, my level 60 Xiangling and Childe with cracked artifacts running a level 90 Harp and level 90 Homer are able to wipe 12-3-1 in 1 rotation in a clean 23-second clear time, and I can probably push it to about 20. The damage potential on this comp is massive and gets higher with Xiangling constellations, which are much easier to obtain than 5-star constellations, especially because you get one of her for free. Now, the ideal time spent in melee here for Childe is 9 seconds. This lines up nicely with him vaping all of the hits of Xiangling's ultimate, which lasts 10 seconds. And as we discussed in the previous video, a 9-second melee period for Childe ends up with a 24-second total rotation time. This gives you a pretty nice window to fun back Xiangling's ult. And yes, even if you have Xiangling's C4, which gives her another 4 seconds of pyronado time, you don't want to stay in Childe's melee form for 13 seconds to vape all of it. If you do this, you'll end up with a 32-second rotation, which just heavily desyncs Childe with his team. Now, according to this chart, this team does have the highest skill floor due to how tight and specific your team rotations need to be. Simply put, it's the hardest comp to do correctly with a moderate skill ceiling to maximize its potential. The reason for this lies in Xiangling's innate issue, her energy issues. See, Xiangling does a load of pyro damage that can also be vaporized, but she has the balancer of having insanely high energy requirements and barely generating any energy of her own. She has an 80 energy cost ult, and Guaba only produces 4 particles every 13 seconds, assuming it even hits things, and Xiangling generally isn't on the field to pick up the particles. As we've discussed in our energy mechanics guide, the character on field gets 66% more energy from any particles picked up. Xiangling being primarily an off-field support means that she won't be able to pick up the pyro energy Guaba is generating, which leads to a huge energy deficit. Now, the way we fix this is by running a pyro battery on the team, aka Bennett. Bennett can create a huge amount of pyro energy for Xiangling through his elemental skill spam. This is what you do to gap fill quite a bit of the time while waiting for Childe's melee cooldown to come up by popping Bennett's elemental skill and then swapping to Xiangling to pick up the particles. Bennett also consolidates being the healer for this team while also providing a huge attack buff from his ult that Xiangling's ult and Guaba can both snapshot. In case you don't know what snapshotting is, it basically means that when you cast Xiangling's ult or Guaba, whatever stats she has at a time get locked in for the entire duration of the abilities. So even when Xiangling loses Bennett's attack buff, her ult and her Guaba still have it added into that damage, which makes it incredibly important to make sure that anytime you pop Xiangling's ult, you have to make sure Bennett's ult is also up beforehand. A final very nice benefit of Bennett in this team is he also provides an additional pyro source that you can use to vaporize Childe's ultimate very easily. This means that a very common opener for this comp is to have Bennett pop his ult and then swap over to your other units to pop their abilities, including vaporizing a Childe ranged ult. It's important to note here that I am starting off with Xiangling before Childe because I have a C4 Xiangling, so she has enough pyronado duration to do it. If you don't have a C4 Xiangling, you want to make sure that you go into melee stance on Childe immediately after Xiangling ult. Your 4th flex unit also uses their abilities at some point in this opener, but where it depends on which unit is your 4th flex one. In this variant with a Xingqiu, we pop Xingqiu after we vaporize Childe's ult to make sure that Xingqiu's Hydra application doesn't eat the vape. However, in this team is also one of the rare instances where we actually might want to use Childe's melee ults. This is because with the fact that we first pop off of Xiangling's abilities, we actually have enough pyro aura down that we can vaporize both the initial stance change damage on Childe as well as a melee ult. Normally, the issue with a melee ult is that if you land the initial stance change damage, you immediately burn off any pyro aura on the targets. This leads to you not having any pyro aura left to vaporize your melee ultimates. If the only pyro units in the team are Childe and Bennett, this is the common issue and why we normally use ranged ult in those situations. However, because Xiangling's Guaba as well as pyronado are going off, we can re-establish a pyro aura right before Childe's melee ult lands and therefore vaporize it. However, Childe's melee ult does not refund energy like his ranged ult does, so this is really only worth using if you are certain you will get your next ult off cooldown. As for the 4th flex unit in this team, it is most commonly going to be Sucrose due to her EM sharing and the VV4 set resistance shredding. If possible, you'll want to have Sucrose swirl both Pyro and Hydro so that all of her bonuses apply to both Childe and Xiangling. You can do this if you have at least 2 targets and apply Pyro to one and Hydro to the other and then swirl both with the same Sucrose elemental skill AoE. You can also replace Sucrose with a different Anemo unit like Anemo MC, but you will lose the EM sharing that Sucrose provides this team. There are other options for a 4th flex slot in this team like Xiangling Zhongli, Alfredo, or Xingqiu. Ultimately, they all work for their own reasons and are easier to micro than running a Sucrose, but Sucrose is largely considered the best 4th slot. Now, this team's investment level is moderately high because both Xiangling and Childe need priority for investments. They both deal an incredibly high amount of damage in this comp, and you cannot afford to skimp on either. We have done some deep dive calcs looking at whether Childe or Xiangling deal more damage, and the TLDR is it depends, but they're basically close to the same DPS outputs. Ultimately, you should be investing in both evenly with a slight priority on Xiangling if you have C3 or higher. Artifact-wise for Xiangling, the absolute best option is going to be a 4-Witch set. 4-Witch is generally the strongest option due to the vaporize damage bonus it provides. However, at the end of the day, set bonuses are just stats and so are substats. Mix and match sets like 2-Witch and 2 Noblesse Oblige can be better if you simply have better substats running those pieces instead. In fact, if you have really cracked Wandering Troop pieces, then a 2-Witch 2 Wandering Troop can beat out the other two. The only golden rule of Genshin is it depends, and our best recommendation is to punch your gear into the Genshin Optimizer. We do have a tutorial video on how to do that, link in the top right and the description. Weapon-wise, Xiangling can run either a damage weapon or an ER weapon. For damage weapons, Dragon's Bane is at the top of the pack unless you have a Homa or a Jade Spear. Dragon's Bane is simply put tailor-made for Xiangling Vaporize. Deathmatch or Blackcliff Pole can also work here if you don't have a Dragon's Bane, but generally speaking, if you don't have a Dragon's Bane, just go for an ER weapon instead. For ER weapons, Favonius Lance and Skyward Spine are both great options, with Prototype Scar Glitter being the free-to-play option. Now, whether you want to run a damage or ER weapon depends on the amount of ER you are aiming for. The general range you want to aim for in terms of ER is 150 to 200%. 200% is the cozy amount of ER that will ensure that you get Xiangling's ult up in time for every one of Childe's 24-second rotations with just very minimal energy generation from Bennett. The nice benefit of running this 200% is that you can gap fill the extra time with Childe's charge shots instead, which simply put are going to do more damage than the elemental skill spam on Bennett. Unless your Bennett is very heavily invested, but that just makes the team even more expensive. Now with 150% ER, you can still fit it into 24 to 30 second rotations, but it does require you to spend more time swapping to Bennett to generate energy for Xiangling. Now if you have incredibly clean rotations, it is still possible to fund Xiangling with 150% ER with only a few Bennett E's, so you still have some time to fit in some charge shots as Childe. At the end of the day, the amount of ER you need depends a lot on how clean your rotations are and how many HP particles you get from the enemies you are fighting. So the best recommendation I can make is to play around within this 150 to 200% range until you find your personal sweet spot for the way you play and the content you're facing. Now, Risake over at Childe Mains does have a detailed guide on the Xiangling comp that covers things more in depth. However, he has told me that that guide is rather outdated at this point. Although Risake is working on a complete 60 to 70 page guide on Childe that will be releasing in the future. But either way, both of us agree that if you want more advice on running the Xiangling Childe vape teams other than what we've covered in this video, our best recommendation is to head to the Childe Mains Discord server and ask for advice over there. The link to that Discord server is in the description of all of our videos. Alright, next up, let's talk ElectroCharge teams. The core support for an ElectroCharge team is Fischl, another free support you already likely have constellations on. Now, Risake does have a guide on the Fisch plus Childe team and specifics on weapons, artifacts, etc. We'll be covering some of the basics in this video, but we recommend checking out that guide for more details, link in the description to that guide. Alright, so Childe has strong synergy with Fischl not just because he can spam out ElectroCharge reactions, but also because he enables Fischl to deal a lot more base DPS. This is because Fischl's Ascension 4 talent dumps an AoE chunk of electro damage anytime the on-field unit is part of an electro reaction, and Childe plus Fischl spams out ElectroCharge reactions. Even though we call these ElectroCharge teams, the actual ElectroCharge damage itself is not super impressive, but when combined with Fischl's Ascension 4 spam, this leads to a lot of purple numbers on screen. Additionally, if you have a Constellation 6 Fischl, she deals bonus flat damage every time the on-field unit attacks, and Childe has one of the fastest attack speeds in the entire game, making him very good at utilizing this. Now, just Childe and Fisch alone is a strong team, however, it isn't at the same level of DPS output as a Xiangling vape team. However, this changes when we add a third unit into the team, a Cons 2 or higher Beidou. This composition is the famous Childe Fireworks team. While I'm not 100% certain on the etymology of this term, I assume it's because there are so many special effects and numbers popping on screen with this comp, it looks like fireworks are going off. The fourth slot in this team is generally the healer of your choice. Normally it's Bennett, so Bennett can vaporize Childe's ult, although Jean also works in this comp because her VV can resistance shred both the hydro and electro damage. You can even run Jingqiu as the fourth slot if you're very confident in your dodging and parrying. Now, Beidou is similar to Xiangling in that her DPS output potential, especially in AoE, is insanely high, but she is held back by her energy demands. We mitigate this to some extent with the combination of Fischl's energy generation as well as the electro resonance. Honestly, Beidou and Childe do not have any particular synergy with each other than the fact that Childe's high attack speed maximizes Bei's ult ticks. However, Childe's synergy with Fischl and Fischl's synergy with Beidou are what make this team so potent. As for why Beidou should be Cons 2 or higher, well, that's because Beidou's Cons 2 is arguably the strongest constellation in the game, including 5-star constellations. This is because Beidou's ult has a bounce mechanic and Cons 2 adds 2 more bounces. And the reason this is such a big deal is because Beidou's ult can bounce onto the same targets up to the max bounces. This means if you have 2 targets, Beidou's ult will bounce back and forth between them up until the max. At Cons 2, Beidou's ult has 4 bounces, meaning it'd hit the first target 3 times and the secondary target 2 times. In these 2 target situations, this is an obscene amount of damage. Beidou doesn't need to be Cons 2 in this comp, but it sure as hell helps a lot. This team is ultimately much easier to run than the Xiangling Vape team. You just pop all of your stuff before Childe goes into the melee, spend 7 to 9 seconds hitting stuff with Childe, then you swap between your other units during his downtime to regenerate Beidou and Fischl's ultimates. Anytime you parry with Beidou, make sure you funnel the energy into her because she has the most energy demands in the team. Any extra time you have, just fill it out with some Childe range charge attacks. However, this team is by far Childe's most expensive team to run resin-wise. You want to invest in Childe, Fischl, and Beidou in this team as they all deal a sizable chunk of DPS in the team. This team is up there with swap teams in terms of resin cost. Also, a fun version of this team is to run Bennett as the 4th slot with a 4 Thundering Fury set. When Childe's melee is on cooldown, instead of gap filling with Childe's ranged charge attacks, you can gap fill with Bennett spamming E. The 4 Thundering Fury set reduces Bennett's E cooldown by 1 second when he triggers an overload reaction, which lets him spam his elemental skill even outside of ults. This generates a lot more off-type energy you can funnel into Beidou, which lowers her energy requirements even more, possibly even letting you forego running an ER Sands on her. However, this does mean your Bennett needs to be invested as well so he deals decent damage, which means this team is even more expensive if you run this variation. Gear-wise, Ally Hunter or Stringless is the best installed option for Fischl. Ally Hunter is slightly better than Stringless at the same refinements due to its attack percent substat, which is just better than the EM substat on Stringless. While the EM is nice and all, it only applies when Fischl triggers an ElectroCharge reaction, which is honestly in a toss-up whether she, Childe, or Beidou trigger the EC. However, the passive applies its 24 to 48% damage bonus to all of the damage from Fischl's Oz and Ascension 4 spam, which is all of her damage outputs. But they are so close, honestly just use whichever one you have a higher refinement on or more levels already invested into. Also, the R5 Windbloom Ode is about on par with an R1 Stringless and a good option if you lack a Stringless or Ally Hunter. And if you have a Hop or an Amos, they are both very solid options for Fischl on virtue of being 5-star stat sticks. However, if you do have one, it's better to run it on Childe over Fischl in this comp. Unless you want to run Viridescent Hunt on Childe instead so that he can cluster targets you wouldn't otherwise be able to cluster. And if you happen to have both of them, Skyward Hop is the better option. Now, Beidou loves Serpent Spine. However, in order for it to get max stacks, she needs to be on slot 1 of your team on the Abyss so she can build up the stacks before you start the Abyss run. This might be awkward for you to get used to for switch bearing if you aren't already used to it. Otherwise, any other damage claimer works well. Archaic and Blackcliff are both solid options. But Serpent Spine with max stacks comes out so far ahead, it is competitive with Wolf Gravestone as a damage option. Artifact-wise, there really aren't super solid choices for Fischl. None of these set bonuses make a huge difference for her. Thunder Soothers is good while Childe is on field, but isn't so good during Childe's downtime. 2-piece Thundering Fury is pretty much a given on her if you have decent substats on them. Risake's guide does provide some deeper analysis on Fischl's artifacts, which is in the description, but honestly, her best option is generally just whatever has the best substats. So as always, I recommend you plug your gear into the Genshin optimizer and find her highest DPS set. As for the artifact main stats, you run the typical stuff for Fischl. You either run a crit rate or crit damage helm, depending on which gets you closer to a 1-to-2 ratio, attack sands, and an electro goblet. Beidou, on the other hand, works great with either Noblesse Oblige 2 or Noblesse Oblige 4, as her DPS of this team is largely tied to her insanely strong ultimates. Her best overall set is going to be a 2-piece Thundering Fury, 2-piece Noblesse Oblige. However, at the end of the day, the substats matter the most. Now, as for Beidou's main stats, well, you obviously run an Electro Cup as well as either a crit rate or crit damage helmet, but generally her sans needs to be an ER senses comp because she is still really energy hungry. If you have a good amount of ER substats, you can try running an attack percent sans, but at the end of the day, you'll have to play around with it yourself to see what the sweet spot is for you. If you are confident in getting max level parries every single time with Beidou and you're running a 4 Thundering Fury Bennett, you can definitely run much lower ER on Beidou. Alright, let's briefly look at the other two Childe team styles, Pure Hydro and Freeze. I don't personally run these teams too often because simply put, their DPS just isn't anywhere close to the previous two options. Simply put, neither of these styles of teams make use of the fact that Childe is an enabling carry to enable higher damage in the team. In fact, I don't even have any footage of a Pure Hydro Childe team to use for the background because I just don't like running that team. It's like running a pure Pyro Hu Tao instead of an Amp Hu Tao. You can do it and it works, but there are just much better options. But at the end of the day, it's just a game and have fun with it. Games are supposed to be fun. If you enjoy playing these comps, more power to you. At the end of the day, the best way to play the game is the way that's the most fun for you. Now, I'm obviously not a huge fan of either Pure Hydro or Freestyle teams for Childe. This all being said, they do come with their benefits. So Pure Hydro is running Childe plus Xingqiu and 2 other flex teammates. This team is mostly nice due to its pure simplicity. Just press a bunch of buttons, then spend 7 to 9 seconds in Childe's melee. Xingqiu can provide some Hydro resistant shred with his cons 2 in this comp, which is pretty nice. This team definitely works, but it simply isn't doing the same level of output that either a Xiangling or a Fischl team can. Childe simply isn't enabling anything in this team other than funding Xingqiu's ultimate a bit. It's instead carried by his personal DPS output, which as previously mentioned is good but not anywhere near the levels of a Ganyu, Vape Deluxe, Vape Hu Tao, or a Xingqiu, or even a Vape Xiangling. Now, the other common Childe team is a Freeze team. Again, this team is not as impressive in its DPS as it's being carried by Childe's raw DPS outputs. Childe, when combined with Kaya or Rose in this team, does enable Freeze, but Freeze doesn't deal any additional damage, it just freezes things. You can also run a Ganyu support here to freeze for Childe, but it is just markedly worse than running Ganyu as a carry because she is the best carry in the game. Now, while Freeze doesn't increase our damage ceiling any, it is valuable for the freeze periods that Childe enables this with his Hydro because things don't get to move and this trivializes game difficulty. However, unlike a Ganyu or Kaya freeze team, this team doesn't have permafreeze and has very big downtimes of freeze. This is due to Childe's Hydro application largely being tied to his melee, which has a downtime. Although you can run a Xingqiu to cover Childe's downtime with his Hydro application. Overall, I'm just not the hugest fan of freeze teams on Childe. It feels like it's wasting his potential as an enabling carry. But at the end of the day, it's a game and play how you enjoy. I don't personally enjoy Freeze Childe or Pure Hydro Childe very much, but if you do go for it, it's just a game and play however you think is the most fun. Alright, let's close out this video by briefly talking about the double carry setups for Childe that I am just not really a big fan of. This is basically the idea of running something like a Childe plus Hu Tao, or a Childe plus Ganyu, or a Childe plus Xiao. Now, the core concept behind this is that while Childe's melee is on cooldown, or the other character's abilities are on cooldown, you can gap fill with each other and go back and forth. Purely in concept, this is a pretty neat concept. The problem is it just completely falls apart in execution. The reality is that it's just not better to run Childe in these teams than running a different support. For example, in a Hu Tao team, you could instead be running a Xingqiu, or you could be running a Kaya or a Rosario, or someone who allows you to amplify Hu Tao's damage spike more. And as we mentioned in our Hu Tao videos, because you need to be popping all of your support's abilities in between Hu Tao stances anyway, you don't really actually have that much extra time to gap fill. At most, Childe will be getting like 1 to 3 seconds of melee out. As for Xiao doesn't actually have any downtime in between his ults unless you're not funding his ults with enough energy. And Xiao with his ult does so much more damage than Childe can by himself that you're better off just running a Nemo battery like Sucrose instead of Childe. And the idea with a Childe Ganyu team is that while Childe's melee is on cooldown, you can just do charge shots with Ganyu to gap fill. But Ganyu already does so much more damage with her charge shot spam than Childe does in his melee form, you might as well just ditch Childe and just shoot things with Ganyu. And practicality aside, these teams are incredibly expensive because since you're running double carries, you have to have 2 heavily invested units. If you want to run a Xiao team or a Hu Tao team or a Ganyu team, you're better off just funneling all of those resources into those units instead of spreading it out with Childe. Especially because Childe just isn't going to be a better support in that team than a more synergistic unit. These kinds of teams are the things I find whales tend to recommend because they already have every unit at level 90. So not only is the double carry going to work a bit better because everyone is already basically maxed out on damage, but they also just have so much extra damage they don't have to run more efficient teams because they stomp contents. They're at the point where a solo Childe with like a Barbara to heal him could just 9-star the Abyss 12. At the end of the day, play what you want and enjoy yourselves. If you enjoy this double carry playstyle, go for it. I just don't find them to be very efficient teams. I'd much rather run a Childe Xiangling Vape on one team and run my Hu Tao on my second team in the Abyss. Alright, that is it for this complete guide on Childe. Thank you as always for checking out the video, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video, let us know what you thought in a comment below, as well as share it with your friends who are looking at picking up Childe. Again, a huge thank you to Risake as well as the other theory crafters over at Childe Mains. Risake did do me the huge favor of reviewing over my script for both of these videos to make sure any inaccuracies or otherwise confusing points were tweaked. And quite a bit of the information in this video did come from various guides and FAQs from Childe Mains, so be sure to check the description for a link to their Discord server as well as any reference material used for this video. And don't forget, Tuner does stream live on Twitch almost every single day. Definitely come hang out if you want to come interact with us. We also do have our Twitters. The @JinxMathlos is my personal account where I post updates about myself as well as various things I'm working on, and the @JinxTuner is the company account run by Tuner. Also be sure to check out our Discord server, the Mathlos Nest, cool group of people all hanging out and learning together. And of course, none of this will be possible without the generosity of our patrons. I do say this every video, and I am going to say it every single video. Y'all the best. As always, be sure to check the description for links to all the various things from the video, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell so you know about any of our new videos as soon as they come out. It is my day off, so I'm going to be chilling and waiting for the next banner to roll around, at which point I'll be doing a rerun guide on Zhongli as well as looking at the new character Yanfei. Happy waifu hunting, whalers. See you in the next one. Bye!